Welcome, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Robbie Dick, and I'm a member of the Control-M Solutions Marketing team at BMC Software. I'm very excited to introduce you to Jonathan Spotswood from GEHA. In just a minute, Jonathan will talk about how Control-M Self-Service can help empower users to get involved with their application workflows. Jonathan, before we get into the details of your story, first tell us a little bit about yourself if you could.
Thanks, man. My name is Jonathan Spotswood. I work with GEHA as the production control team lead. I've been in IT for 14 years or so, and I really would like to inspire the industry forward using automation and orchestration to come together as one team.
That's great, Jonathan. Thank you so much for participating today. I know the last few months have been a struggle for everyone. My routine in such chaotic times was to have some virtual get-togethers with family and friends. I averaged about 3 of these get-togethers a week, and during our chats, a pretty consistent topic emerged. Many of my friends were not used to working remotely and were struggling with the uns. They were unfamiliar, uncomfortable, and generally just unproductive compared to normal, while working remotely in a setting that was different than usual. It occurred to me that some of the friends I've made through work may also be having similar issues, and fortunately, Jonathan came to mind. I had recently visited GEHA, and in the course of that visit, I had heard some details on how Jonathan and his coworkers had achieved success tackling some similar issues. I called him, and he didn't hesitate when I asked if he could share some of his stories. So Jonathan, let's get right to it. I know you have a few stories around self-service and how it can help. Let's start with your application development story, okay?
So this team, before we introduced self-service, really just kind of worked outside of both batch, Control-M, and orchestration altogether. They utilized request and change tickets in a very heavy and slow process that included multiple handoffs to get day-to-day work done. Basically what we did was, in the dev environment, we gave the app dev team access to every job that would run a solution so they could run it on their own, test their own work, and look at their own results. This cut down on all the tickets and the back and forth, and really let them take control of their workflow for the day. We did basically the same thing for QA so they could test code in our test environment.
Let me ask you a question, Jonathan. Up till that point, how heavily involved were these users in their workflows? A little, a lot, not at all? What was that like?
To be completely blunt and honest, they basically developed some code and tossed it into a change ticket, and it was hands off from there, kind of tossing it into a black box, if you will.
So it's safe to say they were unaware of what was going on in a production environment, or in order to get those workflows into a production environment?
That's exactly right. It was, finish up their tasks and let it go on down the change management conveyor belt, if you will. Going through multiple environments, multiple levels of testing. Many teams had to hit different levels of validation and testing and sign-off before it could even make it to prod. The next time the developers would actually hear something about their code wouldn't be until there's a major failure further into our pre-prod or prod environments.
And now with self-service and their involvement, you feel like they have ownership, or they feel like they're kind of involved and aware of maybe what goes on behind the curtain when they're running, when those jobs and workflows need to run in a production environment at scale?
Not only have they integrated into the change management process and understand, going through each environment, they also are getting to see their code run in the batch environment and against actual data instead of on their sandbox servers.
Wow, that's fantastic. It sounds like they really got some skin in the game and are aware now, kind of in a production environment at scale, what goes on. So that's fantastic. Now, how about your provider records story? Can we hear a bit about that one?
Yes, so for the provider records team, they basically had a process inside of batch already in Control-M that queued up and brought work in for their work queues. Without going too deep into it, it was basically a super complicated process that had many jobs that ran, and when they failed, it required DBA help to kind of untangle all the wires that got crossed up when the job ran incorrectly. This also led to frustration between the teams because of this complicated process. It was often ran inconsistently from our operations team. They were utilizing requests to just say, hey, run for this day, run for this day. But that wasn't quite enough information. What we ended up doing was redesigning the entire process. We sat down, drew everything out, and went over the full process in a very collaborative function. From there, we dreamt it up with self-service in mind, letting them kind of take control, take the reins of the process, so that they understood exactly what needed to be run, when it should be ran, and understand exactly when their outputs were ready. This changed them from a multi-day process, especially when there was issues, down to being able to turn this around daily. Eventually, this whole responsibility that I'm talking about here went on to just one person's responsibilities, and the whole team kind of evolved into something else. And so through using self-service, they've taken this huge thing that was a weekly task for an entire team down to just one guy's remember to do for the week.
Wow, so it sounds like there was multiple people that were kind of involved getting it into production, watching it as it got in there, and maybe spent most of the time working on fixes if problems occurred. You mentioned days-long recovery. What are those people doing now? That they're not fighting fires, I assume, anymore? Are they working on less automatable things or more innovative things?
Well, this section of our provider records team has moved over to just be full-on provider records team members, which actually works along with the providers, and I mean, the name kind of says it itself, to work for organizing the records and ensuring the data that's there. This work queue part of the job was just making sure that their work was into the queues so they could get to that work I just listed. So they basically got to get away from kind of the admin task of setting up their day-to-day and get on to their actual responsibilities.
Wow, that's great. Now, I know when I was on site a few weeks ago and we were talking a little bit of the details of some of these, I don't want to ignore the fact that the first story and even the second, I think you've even got another one, they don't all happen instantaneously. I think you wanted to kind of stress that in order to start these processes, you need to get people from both sides of the equation involved. Is that correct?
No, very much so. So specifically in this example that I just gave, coming to the table and really sitting down and dreaming up the process was kind of the long end of the chore here. Actually getting it done was nice and easy, a little bit of testing, right, and they were off to the races. The planning beforehand, the collaboration, the communication, that is really the big important part, because as we started in with just, hey, how can we fix this one problem, it quickly, through conversation and collaboration, really broke down into, hey, how can we rebuild this entire thing into something so much more grandiose than what we have on sites right now. The conversation is really the most important part, because as you start kind of getting people interested and getting your team members to think in the vision that you see, eventually their vision starts to kind of come out too, and you guys are able to help each other kind of get to that next plateau.
That's two great stories, but I know there's more. Can we also hear a bit about, I think was the first success you had with self-service, and that was the story around PPO USA? Absolutely.
Yes, like you said, PPO USA, which is a dental information group in GHA, they were my first true success with Control M self-service. They've evolved quite a bit as time went on. When they first started, though, they had, again, just like the provider records team, a very complicated process. This one was even more so complicated, where it took multiple days to get through it. And as you can imagine, whenever it went wrong, it required DBAs to come in. It required business analysts to come in and double check our input files to make sure that they weren't messed up by the process. It was a real problem process out in the control environment. It was very frustrating, again, that word frustrating, for both our automations team, the PPO team itself, and every other team that had to get their hands in whenever things went awry. It was going awry so much that we did decide to come together and try to figure out something. And that's kind of the first time self-service came to mind. We thought, why are we, the IT group, trying to figure out what this business group needs? They understand exactly what they need. We could build something for them to kind of have more control and understand what's going on our side as well. Through the conversation, we really started to understand what was going on both sides of the fence, and eventually that wall kind of came down, and it wasn't really IT and business anymore. It was just the group. What we eventually ended up doing was automating the full process and kind of giving them the one button click so that they could get their jobs done. It quit taking multiple days, and it quit failing altogether because the right information was getting in there with the right know-how behind it. After we did that, we took a little time off. I hit some other teams with some self-service, and then we came back, and we eventually kind of automated the process away to a completely different process. And now they use this process to do 90% of their information gathering for their clients and get it out there. Over time, they've shrank down their backlog so far that they've been able to take this process and entirely automate it and start working on new products for their clients. Now we have an onboarding process that's also ran through self-service, where we come to the table and discuss what new things could be on the horizon and what new products they could push out for their team. So the real success story here is this team went from simply data migration, if you will, data transmission from our company to a client company back and forth, to now they're designing and coming up with new options for their clients to get either new data or new ways to receive data, or receive data they just haven't been receiving so far on a client-by-client basis. We really wanted to go as far as we could with this group just because they were so involved and they were so open to kind of taking ownership, using their creativity and understanding both sides of the business, if you will. They've just really taken and grown wings and kind of gone on their own.
So it sounds like that one, along with the other two, really started with meetings first. Nobody was writing code or orchestrating workflows at that point, right? That may have come later, but it started with meetings to just understand the process. You could understand what they were encountering and facing and dealing with, and the same for them to realize, from your standpoint, what that meant to get workflows into production at scale.
Yeah, definitely started at the conversations. And to be completely honest, the conversations weren't about, hey, let's try this new thing. It is so painful to get this done. We on both sides of the fence, we had such a pain seeing each other's tickets come through, which is, kind of sad to say, but it's just the truth of it. When you saw this come across, you knew it was going to be a whole ordeal. Things were going to be a problem. Things were going to be a pain. And they were feeling just the same, trying to work with IT. The conversation started with, hey, how can we maybe do this different? Or how can we make this better? Or, some inflection. What is IT doing wrong every time that we fail at this process? Coming from that point of view kind of opened their eyes to be a bit more empathetic and ready to come to the table when it comes to collaborating. We took a lot of their concerns into hand and worked together to come up with kind of the best process. And we drew it all out, literally, and tried to think of every gap that could be in there, and then started, finally coding away and making the automation work for us.
Wow, that really, all three stories are great examples of collaborative stories that ended up achieving success. Sounds like fairly quickly. Once you got everybody kind of in the room together and started to see what the other side was going through and how to, in the end, turn that into something very positive for the business. So that's fantastic. And unless I'm mistaken, I remember hearing at least some high-level details about other similar stories. Is that correct?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, we've set up ad hoc file transfers for our audit team, our credentialing team, and our claims records teams, just to send files in and out of the company. We've set up ad hoc job runs for the claims processing team and our financial team. Overall, we really reduced the number of requests and change tickets that our ops team was able to go from being a controlling-focused operational team to being a enterprise-wide NOC. And I guess that's a knock-on effect. But I think the real thing to kind of keep in mind here is, for every one of these situations, whether it was the big PPO USA or the very small audit team file transfer, it all starts with the conversation. It all starts with the ability to sit down and communicate and collaborate, and most of all, be patient with each other. If there's the opportunity there, you can lead with your vision to go forward and make work and life easier for each other. which makes it easier for us to all be one team, and together, it's very easy to inspire the future.
Well, that's fantastic. I love the idea of IT, or kind of a traditional, computing role in an organization, can take charge and take the lead in finding better ways to do things that ultimately impact the business and deliver better business services. So I love your messaging and inspiration for the future that you described. I think that's fantastic. Thanks for joining us on the call, and please don't hesitate to reach out to Jonathan or myself if you have any questions about what you heard today, or you want to hear more details on any of the topics that we covered. You can get a hold of Jonathan at jonathan.spotswood@geha.com, and that's Spotswood with 2 T's, or myself at Robbie_Dick@bmc.com. That's ROBBY_DICK@bmc.com. Thank you again. I hope you have a great day.